George Washington, before he became president, before he became general, before he became a legend, as a young man, 22 years old, he was sent out to the Ohio Territory to tell the French to leave. The interaction goes horribly wrong. George screws up in the worst possible ways and accidentally sets off a global war. Massive blunder. Career destroying type mistakes here. And this is a story about how George goes from hitting rock bottom to turning that around in this character defining moment where he ends up in a battle. General Braddock is killed and things are going terribly wrong, and George needs to lead an evacuation.
Welcome back to the OpenEd podcast. I am Isaac Morehouse, and today I am joined by Benton Crane. Benton is the co-founder of VidAngel. He is the former CEO of Harmon Brothers, which is a very, very well-known brand or ad agency that's had some major campaigns. He's executive producer of a whole bunch of stuff, the Tuttle Twins TV series, which we actually talked to Connor Boyack about recently. And the newest project, Young Washington, which is coming out from Angel Studios very, very soon. So we'll talk about that in a second. So I'm going to start right in the middle and ask you, Matt Bowman mentioned this to me, and I was like, wait, what? What is bro school?
My teenagers, I've got a 16-year-old daughter and a 14-year-old son. This past school year, they joined a group of other teenage boys who had established, I guess they would probably call it a homeschool co-op. You know, it's basically a bunch of boys that got together. They, I don't know, for lack of a better term, dropped out of high school and and started homeschooling together. And they named themselves Bro School. They went for a year, and then one of the dads, Johnny Hanna, he posted on LinkedIn about Bro School and, you know, everything that these boys had done that year. And I read the post and I took it home and read it to my daughter. I think she was 15 at the time. And she was like, I need to be a part of that. That sounds amazing. And so I text Johnny and said, you know, hey, is this an open thing? Or, you know, can other kids get involved? Can girls be allowed at Bro School? And he didn't get back to me. Apparently he kind of got bombarded with texts after he did that LinkedIn post. And so my daughter actually went and filmed an application video where she basically made an argument that said, hey, here's why Bro School needs me. And so she became the first girl to join Bro School because the application video hit home. You know, I sent it over to Johnny and then he circulated it among the bros. And so she got to join. And then my son and some of the younger brothers of the original bros, they did junior bros. And so basically what it was is, you know, these teenage kids would get together a few times a week. And the focus was kind of on life skills and apprenticeships. So that each kid kind of has to take care of their own academics. They don't like all team up to do the same academic program or anything. So each kid kind of does that different. But they did things like wilderness survival. They hired a wilderness survival coach and learned a bunch of those type of skills. They hired a chef to teach them how to, you know, cook a gourmet meal. They did a bunch of different kind of like job shadow type things with various entrepreneurs and kind of a neat alternative. I'm not sure if it's going to continue strong. My kids, I think, are this next school year, they're going to try something new again. But Bro School was a super fun year for them.
That is such an amazing little story, especially when you mentioned your daughter doing the video application. Previous company that I had was basically trying to help job seekers just ditch the resume and the application and instead put a pitch together, a video pitch, and email it to hiring managers. And like the results are just insane because my kind of, you know, the theoretical side to this is that everything is a signal. Everybody's looking for shortcuts for signals because nobody has time to spend 6 months getting to know you and see if you're trustworthy. And so like a degree or a GPA or a resume used to be a signal that had some value. Those have almost no value anymore. They don't signal anything. Oh, I have a BA from wherever. It's like, what does that mean? I have no idea. So creating signals that can't easily be faked and that stand out. Like you on video, what you say, what you do, what you think of to say, how do you figure out how to get it to the right person and email it to them? Those are such a strong signal. So anyway, I love that she took that approach. And I just love that, like, I think I saw something similar. I don't know if it was LinkedIn or Twitter or something. And maybe it was even the same thing, but it might have been different. Some guy was saying, I'm trying to get a bunch of local teenage boys to basically say, hey, instead of school, let's go and like find houses that have landscaping that needs to be done, or go fix up stuff or whatever, and just like do it for free until we figure out, maybe there's a way to make money off of some of it, and just like take like a unit. Let's like learn about fixing lawnmowers, and then let's learn whatever. And just getting out in the world, getting your hands dirty. It's weird that we have to like call it something official, but we kind of do, because we've moved away from a world where it's natural for kids to be around commerce and like real life. They're all kind of stuck off, separated from the world in school buildings. So to bring that back, it like kind of has to be a bit of a deliberate effort with some marketing around it and some kind of concept of vision that people can catch on to. So anyway, I love the bro school concept. That's super fun.
Yeah, that was actually the third pitch video that my daughter had done. Her first one was, I think, when she was in the 6th grade. She launched a balloon tying business where she wanted to go to neighborhood birthday parties and tie balloons. And so I helped her put together this little pitch video where she was saying, don't hire a middle-aged man from Google. That's creepy. Instead, hire me. Your kids will love it. That sort of thing. And so now she's done 2 or 3 of them, and I think it's kind of a tool set that she knows she can use to to break through the noise and get to people when she needs to. It's really effective.
So I'm already seeing a little bit of the your history with Harmon Brothers and your ability to tell compelling stories, and just as a great marketer. I think just hearing you talk about bro school, hearing you talk about what your daughter's doing, you're smiling, you're talk. It's like there's an element of fun in the act of marketing or selling yourself that I think gets lost. So I know we're going all over the place, but I want to follow this thread. As a marketer, working with Harmon Brothers and working with lots of brands, there's this idea that marketing, trying to convince people that they should be interested in something, is somehow like dirty or sleazy or whatever. And I always feel like that comes from a fundamental misunderstanding of value creation. Like value is subjective economically, and part of the value you get is the way you feel about something. That's a big part of the value you get. And so like marketing, helping people have a better feeling, a better experience, is actually really fun and really playful. That obviously translates onto the job hunt. When people are looking for jobs or opportunities, they have this idea that it's antagonistic, that like there's all these people out there waiting to judge them, and they have to like submit the resume and hope it passes the test. And there's no fun, there's no creativity. And when you think of it like a marketing campaign, we're like, hey, I got a couple seconds to capture someone's attention and make them want to learn more. Let's be playful. Let's be fun with this. So that's like a really broad setup for thinking like a marketer. How has that impacted just the way you've gone about your life and career, and maybe the way that your kids have learned and the way that you have kind of helped them think about? I mean, you already mentioned the example of your daughter learning to pitch herself and put together creative video, but just that marketing lens, I'd love to just hear you expound on that a little bit.
Well, if you think back to, go back to the 1990s and before, like advertising was typically, these commercial breaks, during TV or between the songs on the radio or whatever. And for the most part, advertisers kind of thought of their audience as captive. It's like, oh, my audience is there. They're not going anywhere. They're kind of stuck. So I'm just going to kind of force feed them whatever crappy advertising I want to, because they're captive. There's nothing they can do about it. Well, that's not the world we live in today, right? Whether it's a skip button on YouTube or just a scroll right past on Facebook or Instagram or whatever else, you have to earn people's attention, because they're not captive. They can go right by. And so when you think through that, when you kind of think through the filter of like, I can't just force feed any message or any advertising, I actually have to earn people's attention. And the way that I do that is I have to entertain them. I have to make them smile. I have to make them laugh. I have to provide value. This is not a take type of relationship. This is a give and a take. And so, when you look back over our history at Harmon Brothers and kind of the campaigns that we became famous for, right? You've got Poopery and Squatty Potty and Purple mattresses and chat books and Lumi deodorant. And if your listeners are familiar with any of those, kind of the common thread is that they were fun. They put a smile on your face. Yes, they were effective as an ad. They sold a product. They earned money. They did all those things, but that was all after we earned attention and put a smile on people's faces and provided value. And so I think, that's kind of the key as a marketer. You really have to provide value.
So I want to push a little bit further down this thread and connect it directly to the education side, because this is something actually my daughter was just asking me about this. She was like, I keep hearing people talk about digital marketing. She's 15. And then this is like a, popular career. And I thought to myself, even though most of what I've done for the last 15 years has been a lot of digital marketing, like I'm like, how would I, if she's interested in that, where do I start to get her to learn that stuff? I don't think a marketing degree in college is worth almost anything. It's certainly not in any like modern trends and things. They tend to be very far behind, but even mindset wise, like there's a different mindset. If you have a kid, if you've got a teenage kid that's interested in marketing, where do you start? Like, what is your, because to me, there's a mindset component, like just thinking like a marketer. And so you got to have a little bit of that, I think, to like, some people are just wired that way. But then where do you, like, what do you do? How do you build on that? Are there books you recommend? Are there things that you recommend people start experimenting with? What would you recommend to somebody who says, hey, I think I'm interested in marketing?
So here's what's fascinating about that. That hard to train a marketer, but it's really hard to train an entertainer. And so we actually found we would go out and we would hire comedians, improv comedians or stand-up comedians, people who have, put in a lot of time honing their craft, working on presentation and being in front of an audience and all that stuff. That's hard. Those are hard skills to develop. And then we would bring them in and say, hey, let us teach you how to market, because marketing is actually not that hard. You provide value, you present the problem, you show a solution, you build some credibility, you overcome some concerns, you have a call to action, you have an offer. Like that stuff is like, it's almost, it's almost mechanical. It's almost, you're following a recipe. But the entertainment side of it, that is much more nuanced. It's much more difficult to learn. And so I actually, encourage young people to think about ways to, get some public speaking time. Get like, as hard as sales are, take a summer door-to-door sales job. Like those aren't fun, but oh my gosh, do you learn so much? Go take an improv comedy class. Go to an open mic, at the stand-up comedy club and try your hand at it and see what works, see what doesn't. And some people, it kind of lights a spark and they realize, oh, there's something here. And then they kind of run with it and they develop this ability to entertain and to capture people's attention. When you have that ability, then it's so much easier to come back across and say, okay, now how do I do the marketing elements? So, that's not for everyone. I myself, I'm not an entertainer, but I collaborate with entertainers all the time because I can't market without them. And so I'm constantly bringing in these talented, comedians and writers and that sort of thing. So
I love that you said the door-to-door sales thing, because marketing is really just sales at scale. And if you don't learn the basics of like, hey, how do I help one person see that here's a problem they have, here's a solution, then it's going to be a lot harder to be like, oh, well, let me help thousands of people realize that at the same time. The sales experience, I remember I really started to understand the power of just a good narrative, a good, here's the problem, or here's the major shift in the world, a strategic narrative or a story or a hero's journey. There's lots of different frameworks people use, because I was in fundraising for a nonprofit. So it's just sale. I'm just going one-to-one and meeting with very wealthy people and soliciting donations for these programs that we're running. And I'm trying to connect and realize I've got like 20 minutes of this person's time. They donate to lots of stuff. They're running a business. This is like one tax write-off that they, maybe if you catch them in the right mood, how do I really like capture, here's what you care about, here's what we're doing, here's how they line up. And going through that over and over and over again, that's like where I learned marketing, was from those kind of sales moments. I love that you said stand-up comedy. I mean, it's like, okay, if I can get in front of a room and just figure out, test and get those repetitions in, what do people react to? Like the human psychology component. I love that. What would you say to the more behind the scenes side? So like, learning how to set up and run a whole bunch of ads and do A/B testing and do, the more mechanical SEO type stuff. I know all that stuff's changing rapidly, but if someone's like, yeah, that's not me, I'm not the entertainer, I'm not really the story type person, I'm more the like tinkerer, I like playing around with software tools and trying to make stuff work. What about that side of marketing? Curious your take on that.
Yeah, so that side is essential. That side is super value. You can almost think of it as like, you've got the art and you've got the math, and they have to work together. But this is what I would say. There are people who fall in love with the math side of things to the point where they think of it almost as like the end all be all. And the way that shows up is really spammy ads and really spammy marketing. So think in terms of like one quick trick to lose belly fat, or whatever that is. Basically how they got to that line is they tested dozens and dozens of different lines, and they kept finding out which one outperforms the other, and so on and so forth, until they whittled down. And it turns out when you just follow the math blindly, you end up at really spammy stuff. So cleavage thumbnails and stuff. Why? Because they catch eyeballs. The math says it works. Really pushy sales tactics. Why? Because the math says it works.
Or
And
just the
so,
exhausting. I mean, anybody on social platforms, and each platform has their own little formulas that will be popular for
yep,
6 months, a year. Like currently on Twitter, all I see when I get on there is these threads that are like, Sam Altman just did an interview with so and so. What he said might shock you. Here's 10 reasons why you don't
yep,
realize what actually happened in the interview. Breakdown. It's like every post is that. It's like taking somebody's podcast appearance that already happened and being like, here's 10 shocking things that happened in this podcast. I am so tired of it. It's always about AI too. Like everything. I'm so
yep.
tired. It's just so exhausting, but it's like life by algorithm, like to your point, just turning it into this mathematical problem, even the metaphor of a funnel where it's like you take the customer and they're like a widget and you like cram them down this process. Nobody wants to be treated like that.
I remember at Harmon Brothers, or in our early days, we would always say that we were a data-driven company. We're following the data. But what I discovered is after a few years, data-driven kind of became like the cliche, the industry standard. Everybody says they're data-driven, and I realized that data always needs to be balanced with, call it the art, the brand, the story.
Yes.
You need an opposing force that's saying, well, is that message, even though the data says it's more effective, is it who we want to be? Is it the message we want to put out there? Is it the way we want to be perceived? And so you're balancing it with the art. And so over time, we shifted from the term we're data driven to we're data informed, meaning our creative, the story, the brand, the entertainment, it's all informed by data. We're still using data to tell us, oh, this is working, this isn't working, this is resonating, this is falling flat. We're still looking at the data, but ultimately we're story driven, we're entertainment driven, and the data helps with that. The data doesn't drive that. So you just want to be careful to not put, don't let the proverbial, tail wag the dog.
Yeah. Yeah.
The data is very valuable. It's an essential part of the process, but it can't be the end all be all.
Yeah. I love that. So you ready for the way I'm going to segue this into your current movie?
Sure.
Now I set myself up. This has to be a good segue after that. If you look at the question of like young people's knowledge and appreciation and interest in history, like just like American history, what's America all about? I don't think there's anybody out there who would say, oh, that's in a great spot. Kids really know their history. Their history education is doing a bang up job. if you approach that like an engineer or like a data scientist, you might collect a bunch of survey data and you might look at curricula and all this stuff. And you might go try to make some push to have some different type of books assigned and teachers trained in a different way so that kids could have a better history education. But you're making a movie, you're telling a story. So tell me about Young Washington. What is the vision behind it? And like, I just know it sounds cliche, but I think it's still underappreciated that stories just work better. I mean, if you think about all the things you've, been supposed to learn in a classroom setting in any subject, it's like, what do you remember? A bunch of random labels and stuff. Mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. Like, I don't even know what that means. Somehow I was supposed to learn that. Everybody did. But what do I remember? I remember the
Story.
movies that just like moved me. I remember watching stuff, from the time I was a kid, a great story. And I went on a binge of Civil War, just self-study. I just read every book I could get on the Civil War because I saw the movie Gettysburg. And I was like, this is amazing. I need to learn more about this. So anyway, rather than trying to go and fight in the trenches of who should teach what and what curriculum, what, like, going over the top of all that and just telling great stories that people want to watch because they're entertaining is so amazing. So tell me about Young Washington.
Yeah, so the few history buffs out there will recognize this story, but outside of those history buffs, this story actually isn't very well known. So George Washington, before he became president, before he became general, before he became a legend, as a young man, 22 years old, he was sent out to the Ohio Territory to tell the French to leave, because at that point it hadn't been fully claimed yet by the French nor the British. But the French were kind of setting up camp and whatnot. And so the British were like, well, we need them to leave. And so they sent young George Washington as a young military officer out to tell the French to leave. And the interaction goes horribly wrong. I'm not going to, spoil the story here and share all the details, but basically George screws up in the worst possible ways and accidentally sets off a global war. It accidentally kicks off the French and Indian War, which globally was known as the 7-Year War. Massive blunder, career destroying type mistakes here. And this is a story about how George goes from hitting rock bottom and making the worst possible mistakes to turning that around in this character defining moment where he ends up in a battle where he's serving under General Braddock, and General Braddock is killed, and things are going terribly wrong, and George needs to lead an evacuation. He basically needs to get his troops out of there, and so he mounts a horse and charges the enemy lines. He ends up with 3 bullet holes in his coat and a couple more in his hat, has 2 horses shot out from underneath him, but he goes unscathed, and he gets the troops together, executes a successful retreat, saves hundreds of lives, and basically in this moment proves his bravery, his valor, and he becomes, this is the beginning of the legendary George Washington. And telling that story on the big screen, like Angel Studios is our distributor, and so we're getting nationwide theatrical release for this on the 250th anniversary of our country, so July 4th, 2026. We have John Irwin as the director, which he's an award-winning director. Most recently, he just did House of David, which is like one of the top
Just
shows on
watching that.
streaming right
Yeah.
now. Yeah, it's huge. Your audience will probably recognize several of his titles. There's I Can Only Imagine. There's American Underdog, which is the Kurt Warner story, the football quarterback. Jesus Revolution. Phenomenal director. Phenomenal, award-winning. And he's a history buff. He loves George Washington. And so telling this story is, one of the passions of his life, and so not only is the movie going to be amazing, but we're doing something from a marketing perspective that's never been done before. This is totally unique. We are actually opening up ticket pre-sales a year in advance. which that's the type of thing that it's normal for like a Taylor Swift concert or something. But for a movie, to my knowledge, it's never been done. And there's a reason why we're doing it. So July 4th, 2026, the 250th anniversary. Obviously, that is the perfect day to put this movie out there. But it also happens to be an extremely competitive time to put a movie out there. July 4th is, it's a massive window for all the big blockbusters. And so realistically, Young Washington is going to be going up against, all your superhero reboots and your, whatever else is being put out there, your live action Disney remakes or whatever.
Everything's a reboot now.
Yeah. Yeah. And those guys have unlimited budgets. And the simple reality is that to reach the masses so that this story can be seen and so that it can find its way into culture and it can inspire the next generation, it can remind people of where we came from and what are the values that, that this whole entire American experiment was built on. In order for us to reach the masses with those messages, we have to be able to get as many screens as possible. So the way it works in theaters is like, if you're a tiny little independent film and you go to theaters, you might get a few hundred screens. You might, get a little over 1,000 screens, something like that across the country. Whereas if you're a blockbuster, you're going to come out on like 4,000 screens. And the way to get screens is to signal to the industry that people want to see it. And so the reason we're opening up ticket sales a year in advance is because we're asking people who care about this message, who care about this story. You're probably going to end up seeing it anyways. You're going to buy a ticket anyways. So why not just buy the ticket in advance and send that signal to the industry that says, hey, people want to see this. And by doing so, we maximize the chances that we get on as many screens as possible. So if we can go out the door with, over 3,000 screens, then we're going to be able to go toe to toe with all those, superhero reboots and whatever else is out there. And we feel like, what better story is there to go out there and have a positive impact on society? And I think about my teenage kids and I want them to be inspired by these stories of imperfect people who did amazing things. They sacrificed so much. They put it all out on the line, and as a result, we ended up with this American experiment that we've all been blessed by in such a profound ways. So that's Young Washington. And by the way, this is the icon that we're using for young Washington. So it's a rising sun, and it was inspired, of course, later in George's life when after the Revolutionary War, they're working on the Constitution, and he was the president at the Constitutional Convention. And he sat in a chair that had a sun engraved on it. And at the end, Ben Franklin had the famous saying of, "I've been wondering if that's a rising sun or a setting sun." And then he said, "I believe it's a rising sun on this nation, on this experiment." And so we took that, we made a unique modern version of it that, we're excited to put on hats and t-shirts and all that stuff. But it's basically a symbol of optimism. It wasn't just back then when they were optimistic for the future, but we want our own kids, grandkids, we want people to be optimistic about our future today and remember the stories of the past and these past principles that got us here so that we can lean on those principles going forward. So,
oh man, I love it. It's funny. I knew the story of, the bullet holes in the jacket and, him remaining unscathed in that situation. I didn't know about 22-year-old Washington going to Ohio to talk with the French. I had no idea. So it's interesting. You said being able to inspire people with, people who have done great things, even though they're imperfect. And there's kind of been this long sort of arc that's unfolded in this country. You have maybe an era where all the stories are told in their most stripped down way. And it's just sort of like hagiography, like, oh, George Washington, he never told a lie. And as these kind of simple parables. And then there's like this reaction, this sort of cynical phase where it's like all those stories are all they make them all sound perfect. Yeah, a bunch of these guys were this and they were that, and there was slavery, and just a real focus on like, hey, let's get real. And let's get real somehow turns into nobody ever does anything good. Everybody's just a terrible person if you really scratch, deep enough. And this kind of real cynicism. And I think that era, and I'm kind of like tail end of Gen X sort of, and I think that sort of like died out with the Gen Xers, and the next millennials and beyond are kind of like, look, there's a hunger for hope, for belief with some realism though. Like nobody wants propaganda about, Kim Jong-il, the first time he ever golfed, he hit a hole in one, and just silly stuff about your nation being, all of its founders being perfect, godlike beings. But nor do we want to just focus on all the negative stuff and just be like, oh, they're a bunch of corrupt people from day one. Like neither of those are true. And being able to find the real stories of real heroism and be like, look, here, let's focus on the things that are awesome about this country and its founding and the things that the founders did while being real about it, I think is just such a timely thing.
I feel like both extremes are dangerous, right? On the one extreme where if you just focus on, oh man, George Washington was so amazing, he was a legend, blah, blah, blah. People aren't going to be inspired by that. They're going to feel like, oh, I'll never live up to that. That's not me. Whereas on the flip side, like, you go back to 2020 when all the, monuments were being torn down and stuff. And, like, this idea of like, hey, these guys were imperfect, they owned slaves, therefore they were dirtbags, therefore we should tear down their monument and we should erase them from history. That's dangerous too, right? It's really important, in my opinion, to acknowledge that they were flawed human beings, they were imperfect, they made major mistakes, but despite all that, they also made massive contributions to, to set up what we now benefit from. And I think that's so much more inspiring, for my 14-year-old son to hear a story where he's like, man, that guy really screwed up, but then he turned it around and he was still brave and he was heroic. And I want my son to know that, like, despite being a human, despite being weak, despite having flaws, I can still be brave. I can still swing for the stars and try to do something big, try to do something heroic. I think that's a really important message. And so, gosh, I feel like the time for, these stories to be told is right now.
Yeah, I'm completely with you. There is just a absolute hunger for inspiring stories, for stories about great feats and people doing good, doing the right thing. There's been a long line of entertainment and stories that have really focused on everybody being kind of dark and messed up and at the very best, maybe an anti-hero. But to really like, no, there is such a thing as heroism. So I'm excited. I love it. So those tickets will go for pre-sale this July 4th, 2025, correct?
Yes. Yeah. And actually, as a thank you to anyone who buys their ticket early, we're actually having every ticket be an entry into a giveaway where we're giving away a vintage, this gorgeous Ford F-250 classic truck. It's our way of saying, hey, for anyone,
the same one the Washington drove, right?
Exactly.
My history isn't too good.
Yeah,
That's
no,
so cool.
It's 1970 something, if I'm not mistaken. But just this beautiful truck. And we just wanted something to where we could say like, hey, look, we get it. It's not normal to buy a ticket early, but you're going to end up buying a ticket anyways. So just buy it now. And as a thank you, we'll put you in this drawing to win this truck. And then I think we're also going to be giving away, 1,000 or so of these hats. So
Let's go.
So yeah, I think it's angel.com/Young Washington. You can go grab a ticket early. Once again, angel.com/Young Washington. And we super appreciate the support. And it's a great way to send a signal to the industry that says, yeah, this story needs to happen. We want more stories like this.
Oh man, no, I love it. We didn't even get to half the stuff on my list. I wanted to talk about the VidAngel story, getting that started, some more stuff on Homestead, what the latest is with that project, the movie and the show. I know you kind of had uh, a really interesting approach there, trying to like go from movie to show to even merchandise and like Homestead gear.
Yep.
Um, give me a 5 minute. We'll do the Homestead update since we had an interview with the Bens
Yeah.
earlier on this
Yeah.
podcast.
Ben Mexican, Ben
Yeah,
Smallbone.
yeah. Give me the update on Homestead and where that project's at.
Well, I think it outperformed most people's expectations in theaters. And then it went into streaming and it is way outperformed. So, for instance, when the movie became available on Amazon for rent or for purchase, it was in the top 10 for 2 months. And so you look at, either side of it, you've got like these $200 million movies, and then you've got Homestead, which of course we did. I can't remember the exact number, but it was a super tight budget. We were independent. We were super scrappy. But credit, to the Bens. They did a lot with a little, and made a really compelling story. So the news is that we're about to film episodes 3 through 8. So episodes 1 and 2 of the series have already been out on the Angel streaming app. Episodes 3 through 8, so that will complete season 1. We go into filming in July. So at time of this recording, we're at the end of June, so we're about to go into filming. Then this winter, we're filming season 2. So next summer, season 2 of Homestead will come out. So if any of your listeners have been following along with Homestead, there's a lot more coming, and we're super excited about it. It's this idea. The whole theme of Homestead, right, is when the crap hits the fan and things break down, what rises from the ashes, right? It's family, it's faith, it's community, and that's kind of the core message of Homestead. And that's a really a really important message, so that when people end up in times where it feels like chaos and everything is going nuts, that's what you get to lean back on, is faith and family and community, and that's what sees you through the hard times.
No, I love it. I love it. Ben, this has been Benton. This has been a ton of fun. I almost called you another one of the Ben. There's too many Bens going
Yeah, a
on.
lot of Bens on the Homestead project.
This has been a ton of fun, man. I seriously, we could get into all kinds of stuff. Like, I just have, I love the way that you approach the world, and you're just uh, thinking like an open educator and like an innovator, which is what we love. So go check out Angel Studios, Young Washington. Check out Homestead. Any final words of wisdom you want to leave our audience with when it comes to thinking about storytelling, marketing, in educating their kids?
I guess I would just put in a plug for kind of the core innovation that's come out of Angel Studios, and that is simply that Hollywood is beholden to what we've referred to as gatekeepers, where there's like a small number of men in suits in conference rooms who are making all the decisions of what gets made and what doesn't get made, what stories get told, what stories don't get told. And the big innovation coming out of Angel Studios is just to put that power of the gatekeepers in the viewers' hands and say, hey, viewers, what stories do you think should be told? What stories do you think should be out there? What stories do you think amplify light and have a positive impact on the world? And so if any of your listeners are not yet familiar with Angel Studios or what's going on there, like, just know that that's the core innovation. And so if you've been in any way disheartened or disappointed by what Hollywood's putting out there, Angel Studios is kind of providing the alternative,
You
where
can you can pitch a movie, right? And then all of the members will sort of decide what movies they want to back and they want to, fund for production. Is that right?
exactly there's over 1 million people who are part of that Angel Guild, who they're voting and saying, yeah, this project is amazing, make that. And they're saying, oh, this project, that's not resonating with me. And they're replacing those gatekeepers. And so the stories that are making it out there are stories that people actually want. And they're stories that people are saying, yes, this is what the world needs. This is what my family needs. This is what I want to watch. So
Oh man,
that's pretty impactful in my opinion.
I love it. Well, I would say the theme of this, from starting with bro school to talking about ending with the way that the new world of making movies is something like, hey, you can just do stuff. Like you can just start doing things, get out there and make it happen without needing to go through the typical formal processes and ask for permission. So Benton, this has been awesome, man. Thanks so much for joining the podcast.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.